Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
I would encourage any young person to read as much as possible.
They are separate things. One is just an interpretation of the other.
It jumped right off the page and right into my heart.
Today on Spotlight, a look at an important dress in St. Louis fashion history. Plus, women are twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and a WashU study shows one of the reasons why. And then author Karin Slaughter talks about her new novel and hit TV show, Will Trent. But first, 3 Broadway shows produced by St. Louisans are celebrated with numerous nominations and wins at the Tony Awards. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
You won't find their names up in lights, but these 3 St. Louisans are playing significant roles in bringing hit shows to Broadway. Where you will see their names is in the programs, listed as producers.
It's the biggest hit I've ever been involved with.
3-time Tony Award winner Jack Lane, co-founder of Stages St. Louis, has produced 9 Broadway shows, including a new musical called And Juliet, which has been killing it at the box office by suggesting what would have happened if Romeo's Juliet
didn't kill herself.
It's grossing like 1.2, 1.3 million a week. It's insane. Ever since it opened, came from London. Not a lot of people knew about it, but it got rave reviews. It is a brilliant show. It's a jukebox musical, but when people go see it, they go, I had no idea that it was going to be so moving and so funny.
Or so critically acclaimed. In 2023, And Juliet was nominated for 9 Tony Awards. And so was this unlikely hit.
One of the principal jobs of a co-producer is to raise the money for a show. And I won't say that it was an easy one to raise money for. In fact, one of my most loyal investors read the script and he said, I just don't get it.
His loss. Shucked, a corny but clever musical comedy, looks to have its producers hee-hawing all the way to the bank.
I think if you could pick up your dog with one hand, you own a cat.
He turned it into alcohol.
It's an allegorical story, or in the parlance of Shucked,
we call it a farm to fable.
It was kind of exciting to be associated with a piece of work that's completely original.
Terry Schnook, who has been a producer for more than 20 Broadway shows and has won 5 Tonys, was asked to join Team Shucked by lead producer Mike Bosner, who is based in New York, but grew up in St. Louis and was former Muni executive producer Paul Blake's assistant.
When he sent me the script, I thought, boy, this is just up my alley because I love puns, plays on words. When I read a script and it's a comedy, sometimes the comedy doesn't jump off the page to me. This time, it jumped right off the page and right into my heart.
It means my mother can stop crying. My rabbi's eulogy can wait.
There is nothing funny about the musical Parade. It tells the true story of a Jewish man wrongly accused of murder in the Deep South. The real-life story led to the formation of the Anti-Defamation League. Parade debuted in New York in 1998 and was revived in 2023. And the Muni's Mike Isaacson, who has produced more than 20 shows on Broadway, was involved in both productions of Parade. The 2023 version received 6 Tony nominations and won 2, including Best Revival of a Musical. It was Mike Isaacson's 8th Tony win.
It always feels like, are you kidding me? Did this really happen? I mean, for me, what they represent is, it's sort of like the ultimate souvenir of an incredible experience with incredible people.
And among those people are Terry Schnook and Jack Lane. The 3 of them worked together as producers for Fun Home, the 2015 Tony winner for Best Musical.
Every cliche in the world people think about producers is absolutely not true. We're not really competitive with each other. It's very supportive. You offer counsel, support, guidance, whatever you can do, because there's not a lot of people you can talk to.
Lane, Schnook, and Isaacson are all producing new shows.
Wax on, wax off.
Jack Lane is trying to bring The Karate Kid the Musical to Broadway in 2024, after staging a successful tryout in St. Louis. Mike Isaacson is producing a new comedy called Gutenberg the Musical, and Isaacson and Schnook are both producers for a revival of The Wiz. Producing on Broadway is a risky investment and sometimes heartbreaking, like when the 2019 revival of Stephen Sondheim's company closed just 6 weeks after winning 5 Tonys, thanks in part to COVID.
I remember I went to the closing performance of Company, and it killed me. That final moment when Bobby, now a female Bobby, is blowing out that final candle. I remember with my friend, I was just going, this is like one of the greatest productions I've ever seen in my life, and we are closed.
New York is a place that you want to go if you really want to make your mark. And when I started out, I really didn't know much about the producing business, so that's the place I had to go to learn. And I continue to learn something from every show I'm involved in.
Any producer is always pushing a boulder up a hill with a rainstorm coming down on them. That's why we're all supportive of each other. It's really hard. Now, you're not allowed to complain, and you can't complain because it's also a gift to do it, but it's really challenging. I never take it for granted, and each one surprises me.
Scan the QR code on your screen to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis. Green Eyes describes not only designer Alice Top-Lee's eye color, but it is also the name of one of her best dresses. Curator of clothing and textiles Adam McFarland shows us the dress and explains why it's important in St. Louis's fashion history.
One of the best dressed women in St. Louis in the mid-20th century was Alice Top-Lee. Alice was born in Nebraska, moved to Milwaukee to start her design career, and then Alice moved to St. Louis in 1942, and she worked in the city until 1953. At Forest City, she designed for Doris Dotson, which was a junior wear line for young women. Her collection of clothing included famous designers like Christian Dior and Cristobal Balenciaga. But one of the biggest and best collections that she donated to us was her wardrobe of pieces designed by Charles James. James was known for his very structural and architectural design, and we are lucky at the Missouri Historical Society to have 12 pieces designed by James, all for Alice Top-Lee. The dress behind me is one of my favorites, and it's called Green Eyes. He called it Green Eyes because he designed it based on her green eyes. So you see the peak of green at the top of the bodice and the peak of green on the back. This dress is unique in that it is made of wool, which you normally wouldn't see for an evening gown. This was Alice's decision, and she did that because she knew that wool looked great on her body and that she would be wearing this in a lot of different climates throughout time. In fact, she wore this dress for 11 years, and we have documented all of the different occasions that she wore them to. The first known occasion was in 1949 to a benefit for the socialite Millicent Rogers, held at the Brooklyn Museum in New York City. She also wore it to cruises along the Queen Elizabeth II cruise line, as well as events here in St. Louis, like the Veiled Prophet Ball. Green Eyes was such a special dress for her that she called it her true friend, knowing that it was a reliable dress that she could wear at any occasion. We also know that she altered the dress at some point as she wore it. The original dress had straps that went over the shoulders and crisscrossed in front, and you can see now that she has made this into a strapless gown. While St. Louis was only her home for about 15 years or so, after she moved from St. Louis, she moved to New York. But St. Louis was always an important home for her, and she felt connected to the Missouri Historical Society and the people here.
Next week on History Spotlight, how St. Louis school children once bought an elephant for the zoo.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media. Recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
Stress that's not treated or addressed can lead to many health problems.
We had known for, in several disease conditions and disorders, stress makes things worse, makes symptoms worse.
Dr. Carla Udy is an associate professor of psychiatry at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. She's focused on stress and the development of Alzheimer's disease. Studies show that women are twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
Over the last probably 5 or 6 years, the realization that Alzheimer's disease was more prevalent in females, even when you correct for the fact that females live longer.
So, is it possible that stress could be one of the reasons why?
The Alzheimer's Association had put out a request for applications to look at the underlying causes for this. So why were women getting Alzheimer's disease or being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease more than men?
To find out, Dr. Udy collaborated with Dr. John Cerrito and his lab. Cerrito is a professor of neurology at Washington University School of Medicine. The research team examined levels of amyloid beta in the brains of mice. It's referred to as A-beta, a key Alzheimer's protein.
And A-beta is believed to be the initiating factor of Alzheimer's. In the progression of Alzheimer's disease, it starts to aggregate and forms clumps. And that builds up as what's called plaques in an Alzheimer's brain. And that can start 15 to 20 years before the first symptoms of Alzheimer's even begins.
But how does stress relate to the development of amyloid plaques in the brain?
About 15 years ago, we were looking at the effects of stress specifically on A-beta pathology in an Alzheimer's disease mouse model, and found that stress did in fact make the Alzheimer's plaques, the A-beta plaques that develop in the brain, worse in this model. We didn't look at the difference between males and females.
So they took a deeper dive into their previous research.
We went back to our stress studies to look at the differences between males and females in that specific model. And we actually found that females were much more likely to, female mice, when they're stressed, have a much greater increase in A-beta that lasts a lot longer than the response that we would see in male mice. In male mice, we saw almost no response at all. Some mice did respond, so it's not 100% all females, all males do not respond, but it was a lot more striking in female mice than in males.
Further experiments revealed that the difference comes down to a cellular stress response pathway in brain cells.
There's a fundamental signaling difference between males and females, even though the males did show that they were stressed. If you look at corticosterone, cortisol levels in the plasma, males and females have the exact same stress response. So males do feel the stressor, but their brains just aren't reacting the same way to that stress as females do. A lot of this is driven by what's called the corticotropin releasing factor. Both males and females have it. They both express a receptor for this protein. But in females, the receptor is on the cell surface, and you get activated. You get this change in the cells that increase A-beta levels. In males, the receptor is not on the cell surface, so you actually don't get signaling where you get very little signaling in males through this pathway. This is a fundamental biological difference between the two, and we don't know why that's the case. And there's been great studies done by other groups showing that this difference occurs, and we show it again in our study as well. And we don't understand why that is. Is it linked to the Y chromosome? Is it hormonal, which is very likely? Is there something else that's driving that? We just don't know.
More studies are needed to see if stress and anxiety treatments could prevent or treat the development or progression of Alzheimer's disease.
Effects of that stress using medicines, is that beneficial? Can you prevent this change in amyloid levels? There are also other things that go on in the brain besides just amyloid. There's a protein called tau that builds up in Alzheimer's disease. We have some data to suggest that stress affects tau as well. So those are follow-up studies. And then what else is going on in the brain? Inflammation would be another good factor and things to look at.
Bob Costas and his broadcast live later on Spotlight.
Name?
Special Agent Will Trent.
Ooh, fancy.
Will Trent, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's agent, recently made the jump from the New York Times bestseller list to primetime TV.
What are you doing here? Get in. Murdered teenage girl.
But his fans need not worry. This isn't the only place Trent is solving terrifying crimes and hanging out with his adorable, scene-stealing chihuahua, Betty.
Betty, go away.
Author Karin Slaughter just released the 11th Will Trent novel, the first since Trent's television debut. While After That Night does feature the awkward yet clever special agent, the book's main focus is on his fiancée, medical examiner Sarah Linton.
It's 3 years before the present day, and we see Sarah working at Grady Hospital, and she is a doctor and she's in charge of the floor for the night. And then, unfortunately, there's a patient who's brought in named Danny. And I say unfortunately because she's in the first chapter of one of my novels, so you know it's not going to go really well for her.
Something shockingly realistic and creepy generally happens in chapter 1 because this is Karin Slaughter. With a last name like Slaughter, you can't write romance novels. It just doesn't work. That's your real last name?
It is my real last name, yeah.
Will Trent and Sarah Linton are back after 3 years, as you all know. Yes, you've been counting down, I can tell. How does it feel to have them back?
It's great. You know, the TV show came out in the interim, and as a marketing genius that I am, there's a show called Will Trent. It's all, you know, ABC has posters and commercials everywhere. Will Trent, Will Trent. And so I start the book that comes out after the show, not with Will Trent, but with Sarah Linton, who's not in the show yet. And you see a few pages of Will in the beginning, and then you don't see him for another couple of chapters. So just really brilliant on my part to, you know, get that. You got good feeling and vibe from the TV show. But a lot of the books, I focus on one character more than the other. And in this one, I thought it would be really interesting to have a Sarah-focused book to tell this particular story.
You obviously have created a world, created people that we, in our minds, exist, right?
Yeah.
So then to see that on TV and it's not the way that we're seeing it or you saw it.
My really smart note, because I know so much about TV, was that he talks too much. And they were like, oh, okay, well, thank you, but you know, actually this is television, so he does have to talk. You know, he can't just, it made me realize you have pages where Will is thinking his thoughts, and then he's like, okay. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting what they have to do in order to get the essence of Will onto screen.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, obviously, as readers, Slaughter fans, you guys have watched and gone, wait a minute, Angie is way too nice. Will does not look like the Will that I thought he should look like, and his car is not black.
And that was something I thought of too, but I realized it looks so much better on screen to be tan. And you know, there's that where he's driving through the city of Atlanta and you can see the graffiti on it. That would not have looked the same if the car was black. And you're not just writing for, I'm not just writing for your imagination to fill in the blanks, right? They really have to show these things. In a lot of ways, the fact that the cast looks very different with Will Trent makes it so much easier for me to write my Will Trent. And that's why I say the books are the books, the show is the show, because they are separate things. One is just an interpretation of the other.
To find out how her grandma's traumatic life inspired a character in her book, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org.
They are the best-selling authors and all of your favorite genres. For in-depth, one-on-one interviews, go to hecmedia.org.
at Webster Arts for our new exhibit, Opposites Attract. This is an exploration of the tension between opposites. The concept of tension is an important part of composition in art, so we often see it in most anything in a gallery, but to actually have that as the focal point of an exhibit really offers us the opportunity to explore and to consider what it means to have these two dichotomous ideas together in one piece. So the artists in the show are exploring opposites in a variety of ways. Some are structural. They create a piece of work that causes physical opposites. Some are colors, some are in the composition, some are in the concept. Some of the artwork explores opposites in very obvious ways, such as light and dark, or inside and outside. Other pieces, though, are more conceptual and internal and really force us to stop and look and consider what the artwork is saying. The artist can be interacting with any concept or any idea of opposites. That concept can really permeate any medium, and so we see sculpture, painting, we see a variety of composition styles. There's quite a bit here that they're using to explore the idea of opposites attract. Webster Arts exists to bring art to life. We want to encourage our community and artists to experience life as it happens through art. So in this exhibit and in any of our exhibits, we want to be a place where people can come and they can think, they can feel, they can experience the world through different eyes. They can understand truly what an opposite might be from their own experience. We invite you to come to Webster Arts and see Opposites Attract now through October 27th. And you can learn more information about Opposites Attract and other upcoming events at our website at webster-arts.org.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
My name is Bob Costas, and I've been a broadcaster for almost 50 years now. Growing up in New York in the 1960s, I listened to Mel Allen and Red Barber, two great broadcasters on the Yankee games. Everyone at one time or another listened to Vin Scully, the most literate of baseball broadcasters. I like Jack Whitaker because he was an essayist, and you don't have much of that on network TV sports. You know, I could never separate the announcers' voices from the events, especially the best of the announcers. They were the soundtrack of it. And while I played sports as a kid, I knew I wasn't going to wind up playing professionally or getting a college scholarship. So if I was going to stay close to sports and be part of it, then I would have to try and be a broadcaster or a sports writer. And I went to Syracuse University because they already had a reputation as an excellent journalism school and communications school. And that turned out to be a big advantage for me. When I was a teenager and in college, the legendary announcer was Marv Albert. And just about everybody at Syracuse calling games on the campus station was using some of Marv's expressions, and whether they knew it or not, they were copying Marv's rhythm and pace. I think when you start out, inevitably you're going to be copying people who you admire. But eventually, if you're any good at all, you'll develop your own style. You have to go with something that's true to you, or else you won't be very good at all. My first job was broadcasting minor league hockey in Syracuse. And then from there, I was lucky enough to land a job at KMOX in St. Louis. Only a couple of years after I got there, CBS TV began using me on small regional games during the football and basketball season. By 1980, NBC had hired me to do NFL games and a few other assignments for them. And I wound up at NBC for nearly 40 years. I also was able to work at HBO. And when the baseball network came into existence in 2009, I signed with them. In the days leading up to the game, you're paying attention to the two teams involved that you're going to call. You're watching as much as you can. It's easier to do on the internet than it was for much of my career. You're trying to digest as much information and insight about each of the teams and the circumstances in the league, the story of their season. And now there's so much information that part of your job is to act as an editor and to say, wait a minute, yeah, all of this stuff is factual, but which of it is interesting and pertinent and makes a larger point, as opposed to just being information that is neither interesting nor particularly essential. And then usually the day before and the day of the game, you're meeting with the managers and you get some insight. You talk to those who have covered the team on a regular basis, the writers and broadcasters who are around the team, and then you go and you hope that you're well enough prepared and you take your chances when the red light comes on. I think a lot of people would tell you that the travel is the hardest part. At the beginning, the travel can be exciting. It takes you to places you otherwise would never go, brings you in contact with new experiences and new people. But the travel can also be tiring. And living out of a suitcase, sometimes the travel can wear you down. But one rule of thumb is that you want to get your foot in the door. You want to get your first job, even if it doesn't line up with what you ultimately hope to do. You want to build your resume. And I would also encourage any young person to read as much as possible. There's more and more material available than ever before, but a lot of that material that's on the internet is not terribly well expressed. It's not really thoughtful. If you read well-written newspaper and magazine articles, and if you actually read honest-to-God books, it isn't that you're going to plagiarize anything that's in there, but reading gives you a greater appreciation for language, for turns of phrase, for various ways to express yourself. The broader your vocabulary and the broader your frame of reference, not just about sports, but about the world, the more interesting and effective you'll be as a broadcaster.
Next week, it's World Opera Day, so we'll take a look back at some of Opera Theater St. Louis's outstanding shows. Plus, the story of St. Louis school children who bought an elephant for the zoo in 1916. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.